Ever get that feeling when you take your car in for something simple, like just an oil change, and next thing you know, they're talking about a whole engine overhaul?
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Well, today we're diving into the aviation world's version of that major versus minor repairs and alterations when it comes to aircraft.
That's right. And we're going deep into the FAA documents that spell it all out.
Yeah.
FAR 43, Appendices A and B.
These aren't your typical car repair manuals, are they?
Not at all. We're talking about a whole other level of detail here.
So let's start with something that, at least on the surface, sounds pretty straightforward. Preventative maintenance.
Yeah.
Appendix A even gives us a handy list. Tire changes, oil, replacing seat belts.
Right.
It's like the annual checkup for your aircraft, right?
Yeah, you could say that. But here's the catch.
Yeah.
The FAA is really specific about what actually falls under preventative.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if it's not on that list in Appendix A, it's not preventative maintenance, officially.
So even if a repair seems simple, it might not actually qualify? That's kind of wild.
It is.
What's an example of that?
Well, think about something as, I don't know, seemingly basic as replacing a landing light bulb.
Okay. Yeah.
Seems pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
But those lights, they're part of a system. And especially when it comes to night operations, a functioning system is absolutely critical.
Right.
So Appendix A actually lays out exactly what's considered preventative maintenance, even for those lighting systems.
So even seemingly small components, you got to treat them with that same level of importance.
Wow. Now, for all you private plane owners listening out there, this next part might surprise you. When it comes to primary category aircraft, you might actually be qualified to do some of this preventative maintenance yourself.
Wait a second. Are you telling me I could be my own aircraft mechanic?
Well, hold on. Maybe not quite. You have to be a licensed pilot, of course, and meet specific requirements.
Right.
And following the manufacturer's instructions, that's non-negotiable.
Of course, yeah.
But it does highlight this interesting aspect of this specific category.
That's pretty cool, actually. It's not every day you get to tinker with your own plane, right?
Right.
But let's be honest, some repairs are way beyond a DIY project. And that's where we get into these major versus minor alterations, right?
Exactly. And Appendix A, that's our guidebook for all of that.
Yeah.
This is where it gets really interesting because we're talking about modifications to the actual structure of the aircraft.
Okay, so like modifying the wing structure, I mean, that just sounds major, but why is that distinction so important?
Well, because we're not just talking about how the plane looks.
Right.
We're talking about something that directly impacts how that aircraft flies.
Mm-hmm.
The flight characteristics, the safety, the stability.
Right.
That kind of alteration requires some serious engineering, rigorous testing, and of course the FAA's stamp of approval.
So it's not a decision to be taken lightly at all?
No.
And I imagine the same goes for the engine, right? Like, what if you wanted to swap one engine model for another?
Absolutely. You're thinking like an aircraft mechanic now. That would
Yeah.
definitely fall under a major power plant alteration.
Yeah.
You're essentially changing the heart of the aircraft, and that could significantly impact its performance, its safety. Again, specialized knowledge and strictly following those regulations is key.
We can't forget about those propellers.
Right.
They might look deceptively simple, but I bet there are a ton of rules about those too.
You bet. Even those seemingly simple propellers, they're absolutely critical to flight. Appendix A really gets into the weeds of what is and isn't a major alteration when it comes to propellers. Changes to the blade design, the hub, adding a de-icing system, all of that, those are considered major alterations because even those subtle changes, they can have a huge impact on the aerodynamics, the engine performance, and ultimately safety.
It's amazing how every little detail matters when it comes to aircraft maintenance.
It really does, and that's what Appendix A is there for, to provide this standardized system so that everyone's on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just eyeball it. You need to actually refer to this specific list to classify it correctly.
Okay, so we've talked about preventative maintenance, we've talked about these major alterations, but I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to aircraft upkeep, right?
Oh, yeah.
What about all the paperwork involved?
You know there's paperwork.
I figured.
And when it comes to these major repairs and alterations, there's one form that reigns supreme, FAA Form 337.
Oh boy, here we go.
But we're going to save that exciting chapter for next time.
And we're back to the world of aircraft maintenance. We added last time on the ominous note of paperwork.
Yes, paperwork. Can't forget about the paperwork.
So no time like the present. You ready to dive into that?
I am. We're talking about FAA Form 337. The document that makes sure all of those major repairs and alterations that we talked about,
Right.
they're all done by the book.
Okay, but why so official? What's the big deal with this form?
Well, think of this Form 337 as like a permanent record, like a detailed history of all the major modifications that have been done to your aircraft.
Right.
It's proof that everything was done according to those FAA regulations.
So if an inspector ever has questions about a past repair, they can just pull up this form.
Exactly. It's all right there.
Yeah.
Who did the work? What parts did they use? How did they actually do it?
Wow.
But here's something that might surprise you. There are actually times when even major work doesn't require this form.
Really?
Yeah,
I thought it was mandatory for, like, anything major.
it is.
Yeah.
Unless the work is done by an FAA-certified repair station.
Oh, right. Those are like the top-tier aircraft mechanics that we talked about before.
Exactly.
Right.
They have the expertise, the authorization to actually sign off on these major repairs directly in the aircraft's maintenance logs. No separate 337 required.
So it's all about trust and a proven track record.
Exactly. But don't get any ideas about skipping the paperwork altogether.
Right.
Even with these repair stations, keeping those records meticulous and detailed, that's critical.
Got it.
Those maintenance logs just as important as Form 337.
Detailed records are key, especially when we're talking about something as important as aircraft.
Absolutely.
Speaking of official approvals, what about those big design changes? That's where those supplemental type certificates come in, right? The STCs.
That's right. You got it. STCs are kind of like getting, I guess you can say like the manufacturer's blessing for an upgrade, even if they didn't actually design it.
Okay.
So let's say you want to modify your aircraft's structure, maybe add some new fancy feature or something.
Right.
An STC that confirms that your modification, whatever it is, meets all the necessary safety and airworthiness standards.
So it's not exactly a quick and easy process then. You can't just slap on a new wing and call it a day.
Not a chance.
Whoa.
We're talking detailed engineering analysis, testing, and of course FAA approval.
Of course, yeah.
But once you have that STC, it's a game changer. Because now your modification is officially recognized. And that could even have an impact on the value of your aircraft.
Wow. So paperwork with a price tag. Okay, so we've covered the the preventative maintenance, major versus minor alterations. We've even touched on the who, those certified repair stations. But what about the how? Like the specific instructions for how you actually keep a modified aircraft in tip-top shape.
That, my friend, is where it gets even more interesting. We need to talk about something called Instructions for Continued Airworthiness, or ICAs.
ICAs, okay?
They're basically like the instruction manual specifically for your modifications.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not enough to just install the new part. You need to know how to actually maintain it properly.
Exactly.
What kind of things are we talking about here? What's actually outlined in these ICAs?
Everything. They might include special inspection requirements, like using X-rays or ultrasonic testing to make sure that that modification is structurally sound.
So you're really getting a look inside.
Right. And they might specify the exact type of fasteners to use, the torque settings, even the installation techniques. It gets really specific.
Wow. The level of detail here is kind of mind-blowing.
It's pretty incredible.
I feel like we just scratched the surface with these ICAs, though.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot more to uncover. In fact, there are 16 specific points that make up a complete ICA.
16 points.
Yeah. We'll dive into those when we continue our deep dive.
Back again. Ready to finish up our deep dive into the world of aircraft maintenance.
Absolutely. We left off with those instructions for continued airworthiness, the ICAs.
Right, those detailed instructions for keeping those aircraft modifications safe and airworthy.
Exactly. And remember, there are 16 specific points that a complete ICA needs to address.
16 points. That's a lot to cover. What kind of details are we talking about here?
Well, let's say you've got a brand new piece of equipment installed on your aircraft, something that required one of those supplemental type certificates, those STCs.
Right.
Your ICA, it might include specific inspection requirements just for that modification.
Okay, like what kind of inspection?
I'm talking X-rays,
Yeah.
ultrasonic testing, maybe even magnetic particle inspections.
Wow. That's some serious stuff. Why so intense?
Well, it's all about making absolutely sure that the structural integrity of that modification is sound. We're not just talking about a simple part replacement here.
Mm-hmm.
These modifications, they can affect the entire aircraft.
Right.
So these inspections, they give us a way to basically see inside those really critical components.
It's like you're getting a peek beneath the surface, making sure everything's as it should be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not even just about the inspection itself, the ICA. It might actually tell you what data needs to be recorded during those inspections.
Okay, so we're talking really meticulous record keeping.
Oh, yeah. Stuff like structural fastener types, the torque settings that were used,
Mm.
installation techniques. It gets really specific.
It's incredible how much detail goes into this. It just makes you realize that even the smallest components, they play such a crucial role.
Absolutely. And speaking of specialized instructions, some ICAs even have a whole section dedicated to the tools that are needed for maintenance.
Okay, so we're not talking about your average wrench and screwdriver set.
Not necessarily, no. Some of these modifications, they require really specialized tools that you wouldn't just find in a regular toolbox.
Right.
These tools, they're often designed for a very, very specific purpose to make sure that that maintenance is performed exactly according to the ICA.
So these are tools that the average person probably wouldn't even recognize.
Probably not.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so we've got these ICAs, these incredibly detailed instructions, but how do they actually become part of, the aircraft's actual maintenance routine?
Good question. So let's say you're flying your own Part 91 operations. It's your responsibility to actually take that ICA and incorporate it into your regular inspections.
So no tucking it away in a drawer somewhere.
Definitely not. You need to make a record of it, a very clear record in your aircraft's maintenance log, stating where that ICA is located, how it's being incorporated into your maintenance schedule.
So the ICA basically becomes like an extension of the aircraft's own documentation.
Exactly. And for bigger aircraft, like the ones flown by commercial airlines, it's pretty similar.
Okay.
But the responsibility there falls on the air carrier to incorporate those ICAs into their maintenance program.
So no matter who's flying, those ICAs, they are non-negotiable.
Absolutely.
It's all about maintaining those incredibly high standards of safety in aviation. And, we started off by comparing all this to like a car engine swap.
Why?
But it's clear that aircraft maintenance, it is in a league of its own.
It really is. And it's not just about how complex those repairs or alterations are. It's about that meticulous documentation, the tools, the inspections. It's all connected.
It's like a whole ecosystem of procedures and protocols, all designed to keep those planes up in the air.
That's a great way to put it.
It really makes you appreciate, every time you board a plane, all the work that goes into it, all those people behind the scenes working to keep us safe.
I agree. It's really quite remarkable.
Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive into aircraft maintenance. Until next time.